Joining me now from his office suite in the Capitol is Senator Dick Durbin, the #2 Democrat in the Senate and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Lynn.
Today, I want to focus our conversation on your work on the Judiciary Committee, a look at what you've done in the last 2 years and a look ahead with the new Congress that's sworn in January. But one of the biggest legacy achievements that I want to talk about in the beginning is the confirmation of judges and how the Biden administration appointments and your work on it in Judiciary Committee has changed the face of the federal judiciary with these lifetime appointments. Could you set the stage for us and what you were able to accomplish in the last 2 years, and then we'll maybe drill down a little bit on what these appointments mean?
Well, of course, the interesting thing about this undertaking is that we have a president of the United States who once held the same position I hold as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And I will tell you that Joe Biden personally follows our progress in the committee and has spoken to me, I can't tell you how many times, his hand on my shoulder, thanking us for 11 to 11 subcommittee or committee. We've been able to achieve quite a bit. He set the standard. He said he wanted more diversity in the judiciary, and he's produced nominees that meet that goal. As of today, and we're not quite at the very end of the session, but as of today, we have 97 federal judges who've been approved, lifetime appointments. It is possible in the closing hours of the session, a few more that are on the calendar, 29 more eligible to be voted for might be considered. But 97 should be put in perspective. And in the Obama years, in the first 2 years, they approved 43 Title III judges. As I said, we have done 97. In the Trump years, first 2 years, 85. We've done 97. We have had one Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and in his time, President Trump had 3, as we well know. So I'm pretty proud of what we've been able to achieve.
So part of the plan here, though, is also to diversify judgeships. I've written about the all-male, all-white judgeships in the Northern District of Illinois and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and how that's changed. But overall, I mean, the statistics are, more women, more people of color, and there's also been professional diversity too, more public defenders, people with different life legal experience. Why is that important?
Well, it's important so that we have balance in the courtroom. And I'm not taking anything away from white male former prosecutors, but that was generally the category of individuals who were appointed to the federal judiciary in the past. And many of them were extraordinary, did a good job, and showed no prejudice in the courtroom as far as I'm concerned. But we felt that people who walked into our U.S. federal courtrooms should see sitting on the bench the diversity of our country. So we have appointed more women of color to the circuit courts, which is the second highest level of courts in this 2-year period of time than in the entire history of the United States leading up to this moment. And it's going to be seen and felt all across the board. Judge Dow, Robert Dow, who took on the job as chief of staff for Chief Justice Roberts recently, visited last week, and he noted the fact that they talk about the Roberts Court. He said when it comes to the Northern District of Illinois, they talk about the Durbin Court, because I've been around for a while and appointed or had a hand in appointing so many judges. And if you look at those we appointed in the Northern District of Illinois, which serves Chicago and Rockford, you see real diversity. We've gone out of our way in terms of women, in terms of minorities, Asians. We've really gone in LGBTQ. We've really done, I think, an exceptional job, and it's a good working court. Judge Dow was kind enough to say it's very collegial and very professional.
And so our listeners know Judge Dow, who now is the top staffer to the Chief Justice of the United States, came from the Chicago bench. But Senator Durbin, you have some achievements even under the Trump administration because of the arrangements and the deal making and the way you approach judgeships. In the Northern District, we had a judge appointed under Trump who, by all examination of her record, is supportive of Democrats and is gay. So could you take us behind the scenes and tell us how you navigate and deal with Illinois Republicans and Republicans on your committee to get choices that basically can get through committee and get confirmed?
Well, Mary Rowland is the judge you're referring to, and she has been a career project for me because she was first suggested out of the Federal Public Defender's Office more than 10 years before she came back. First time around, she didn't make it for a number of reasons, which I won't go into, but I didn't give up on her. She was an exceptional, talented person, and she was appointed federal magistrate by the judges of the court in that interim period of time. So when her name came back up, we really worked hard to see if she could be approved, and she was. She's doing an exceptional job. I'm glad we stuck with it. But what I did with the Trump administration was develop a close working relationship with some of the highest ranking members of his administration. And we literally worked out compromises so that they were satisfied that they had enough conservative judges coming on board. And I was satisfied that the people that we were talking about were not extreme. I think we really struck the right balance. I can't tell you how many Republicans refer to that now, saying, well, even Durbin reached an agreement with the Trump administration for federal judges. It can happen. Now, I didn't accept all of their nominees, nor did they accept all of mine, but we found agreeable middle ground.
Well, also, can you take us behind the scenes on our Illinois system, which is, I don't know, is it unique or is it maybe other senators could work it out? Through the years, you've had a system with varying ratios of picks, where you have given the Illinois Republicans a say. Is that still in play in the Congress that's has wrapped up? And how will it work in the new Congress when the delegation only has 3 Republicans in it?
Well, here's what we said from the beginning of my time 25 years ago in the Judiciary Committee. For every 4 nominees, 3 will be appointed from the president's party, 1 from the minority party. And each senator, each Democrat, each Republican, has the power to veto any choice before it becomes known to the public. And that has worked so well. I can't tell you over and over again how we've been able to come up with an agreeable approach that really says bipartisanship is part of it. This has been a little different circumstance in the last couple of years because of the number of vacancies and the people who are in the delegation. But I stick by that. I think that principle is still a sound one, and I recommend it to others. How do we come up with these judges? Well, first we ask who's interested. And sometimes there are a number of people interested and other times not. And then those who are interested have their resumes presented to our panel that stands in judgment. Judge David Corr, retired federal judge, is the chair of that. He does an exceptional job. And we have 7 or 8 people who then review the applications and make recommendations to me. But we submit as many as 5 to 7 names to the White House and start choosing from them. And that's what we're still doing now.
So do the who's the senior Republican in the delegation have a say in these appointments, or just in the downstate circuits where they serve?
Well, it changes from time to time. There was a time when under President Trump, when Congressman John Shimkus was a ranking Republican. And I took a little while, but I convinced him that the approach we'd been using was a reasonable one. And he came around to it and agreed after he saw it in action.
Take me behind the scenes of how hard it has been in these last 2 years before we look ahead in getting the nominees out in a 50-50 Judiciary Committee, where now and then some nominees have been held up for reasons having nothing to do with their qualifications.
Well, I mentioned to you the numbers, the first 2 years of Trump, 85, first 2 years of Obama, 43, our number is 97. But then you go back to the Clinton administration, and the first 2 years, they had over 120 who were approved. How were they so successful? They took voice votes. They didn't have record votes. We have had to labor not only with an 11-11 committee, but we also had to face the reality that Mitch McConnell was not going to cut us any slack. Every nominee had to go through a pretty rigorous and time-consuming process before they could be approved on the floor. That's why 29 well-qualified people were still sitting on the calendar. We just ran out of time. They'll have a chance again after the first year, I might add quickly, but that slowed us down considerably.
So after in 2023, when the new Senate is sworn in, there'll be 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans. So does that mean that the Senate Judiciary Committee will not be 50-50 anymore?
I believe it does. We haven't really reached the point in the process where the number of members in each committee has been chosen, but I anticipate that ultimately it's going to be 11-10 or 12-11. I hope it's 11-10. I like that better.
So judges that are in the pipeline at the end of 2022 that don't get confirmed before that don't get confirmed before the new Congress starts, does the clock start over? Do they have to go through a Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation?
Yes, they first go back to the White House. The White House makes the decision whether to renominate them. And I think in most cases they will. Then they come back to the Judiciary Committee. The only difference is they don't have to personally appear and be questioned again. They can be voted on in the committee to bring back to the calendar. If things work smoothly, it might be just a matter of weeks before they're back on the calendar for the new session.
And that's helped, isn't it? Because you have 51 Democrats?
Yes, it's helpful. And it should move more quickly.
So one of the other things that you will have, if indeed there's a majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee, is you will have subpoena power if you choose on investigations. You don't have that now. What difference will it make as you approach your 2023 as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, let me say, we did not issue any subpoenas during the last 2 years. It would have taken an agreement with Senator Grassley and myself, a bipartisan agreement to do so. I didn't see a situation where a subpoena was needed, so it never came up. I don't know what to anticipate in the next 2 years. I'm curious as to what's going to happen in the House, because the people who are likely to take over the investigative committees have announced that they're going to go into a investigative mode and accusatory mode, and I don't know where that's going to lead. We may be called on to provide some balance to that equation. I can't say. I don't want to say too much now. I want to just tell you there's important work for us to do on many other topics rather than investigation and impeachment. I hope that we can roll up our sleeves and address those issues.
What are your priorities in 2023?
Well, judges, I want to finish the judges and continue to fill the vacancies. And I want to appeal to the Republicans to submit what we call a blue slip. Here's what it says. If I'm proposing, or if the president's proposing a court nominee in any state, and the two senators are both Republicans, the Democratic president's proposing this nominee for the district court, then we asked if those two Republican senators will submit a blue slip that basically says it's all right to go forward with this nominee. And we've been able to achieve that in 3 or 4 different circumstances in the last 2 years. I'm reaching out to the Republican senators saying, I was able to work with President Trump to fill vacancies. You can work with this president and me to fill the vacancies too. Let's try to find some common ground. Some people who are on the spectrum of the point, political spectrum of the point, where they can be trusted by both sides. So I want to get more and more involvement and make this a more bipartisan process.
Well, you just had that demonstrated when on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals based in Chicago, but covers Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, the Indiana judge, not that it's officially the Indiana judge, but the judge who takes the Indiana seat was given the backing, or as you call the blue slips, from the 2 Republican Indiana senators. How did that come about?
Well, that's interesting, Lynn, because it started with a visit I made to the Congressional Black Caucus in the House. And I met Congressman Andre Carson from Indianapolis. And he said, I don't know what to do. I'm a lone Democrat in a very Republican state. and I want to work with Biden to put a nominee on the court, but I need the senators. And I said, well, have you spoken to him? He says, no, I haven't. I really don't know him very well. So I went to the Indiana Republican senators and I said, Congressman Carson would like to sit down with you and see if you can reach an agreement as to a nominee, the three of you. And I'll respect it if you can. And darned if they didn't do it. They ended up coming up with it. Senator Braun and Senator Young came to an agreement with Congressman Carson. That's what I'm looking for. Anybody who has an open mind and is willing to go through the process, I think can achieve the same results.
So it does, and I've written the story about the Illinois-based nominees. I said a history making this, history making that. First female, second, first Asian American judge, first open LGBTQ. This is in the last few years. We have both been involved in our business, our respective pieces of this political and government business for a long time. Do you think things could move fast enough and that we have enough vacancies that in the next 2 years we could move past the first and the seconds?
Well, I think it's possible, but let me tell you this, the wrecking ball that's knocking down walls of discrimination takes more than one swing. It takes some time. I mean, it goes back to the point that when I was in law school many years ago at Georgetown Law, I'm sure that fewer than 10% of the student enrollment were women and minorities fewer than 5%, for sure. I just looked around and I could tell it was a lot of white males like myself. And now more than 50% of the enrollment at Georgetown Law School and most law schools will be women, and there's a substantial minority of minority students who are part of it as well. This all works its way into the system. They become young attorneys in the U.S. Attorney's Office and Defender's Office and corporate law, and they eventually emerge ready and qualified to be judges. It's going to happen, but it takes some time and it isn't done overnight. I think, for example, I was surprised with Ketanji Brown Jackson. That was Joe Biden's suggestion for an African-American woman to serve on the Supreme Court. He couldn't have picked a better person as far as I'm concerned. It was a test of my patience many times to go through that hearing, and I'm sure a greater test of her patience, but she made it, and she's done well in the court. But that was groundbreaking. I will add quickly that I didn't think it would be such a big deal to so many people then until it was done and over. How many African-American women came up to me, many with tears in their eyes, and thanked me for their process. They should have thanked the president, but I was glad to be part of it. It really made a difference to see an African-American woman go through this process, weather that political storm, and end up making history on the court.
So as you look at what you have to do, one of the yardsticks you'll be measured by is if the Biden White House leaves vacancies unfilled. That was a criticism of the Obama administration, that he left office for whatever reason, leaving vacancies, lifetime vacancies that Trump was able to fill. With what do you see the headwinds going into 2023 for being able to fill vacancies on a faster pace than we have been doing now?
Well, one of the real challenges we mentioned earlier, red state senators who will sign permission slips, blue slips to move forward with nominees. That's a major part of the outstanding current vacancies. And if we can get cooperation in that regard, it can work. Now, we had an unfortunate experience in Wisconsin where it broke down. We have Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson, who are the senators, a Democrat and a Republican. They are initially agreed on a nominee, and then Senator Johnson changed his mind. And so we haven't been able to get back into agreement. So it's not easy. In some people, it's harder than others, but we're going to keep trying.
On it. So I see. So the states with a split Senate.
Split or both Republican senators. It's a challenge.
Wasn't there talk about doing away with the blue slip, meaning that you might do away with needing permission? You're the majority.
Well, here's what I said. I kind of hedged it a little bit. I said, we're going to respect the blue slips, except in those circumstances where I believe that they're being used for a conscious purpose of disregard of a qualified candidate because of race, gender, or sexual orientation. because we've had examples since I've served on the committee where in some southern states, it was just impossible to get a black judge through. They were determined not to allow it. I haven't run into that so much anymore. And I think that's a good development. But if there is clearly a discriminatory effort being made to keep certain people off the bench, I would suspend the blue slip. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that.
So you may suspend the blue slip under discrimination, maybe race or gender. What about if there's discrimination for ideology? If it's a case like Wisconsin where there just can't be agreement, how would you risk leaving with an election in 2024 where you might not know the outcome, though you would have one more lame duck? Would you risk leaving vacancies open, or when do you think you would consider suspending your blue slip policy? And it's just a policy, right? It is
a policy, but it's one that I used to my advantage in the past as a minority member of the Senate, and I respect its presence. This is so subjective. What is the real reason that somebody is opposing a judicial nominee? And if it's a situation as we had in the extreme, where there's never been a black judge and one is proposed with clear qualifications in some state, that's pretty obvious. Same thing with women, pretty obvious. But when it gets down to ideology versus some other aspect, it's subjective. I've not been tested on this yet. It'll be a tough thing to live up to, but I wanted to make that exception possible.
Looking ahead in the new congressional term, what subjects of hearings do you want to dig into?
Well, let's start with the drug policy of the United States. Everybody concedes the fact that we have a terrible drug addiction problem in America when it comes to opioids and fentanyl and other narcotics that are flowing into the United States and addicting Americans in every direction. And so you say to yourself, well, how does our federal law look when it comes to drugs? Well, in Title I, the most serious narcotics, we include something called cannabis. If you live in the state of Illinois, you say, wait a minute, cannabis, they sell that on the street corner here in the store. It's legal in the state of Illinois. And under certain circumstances, people can buy it and use it with impunity in our state. And yet it's still one of the most serious drugs at the federal level. Makes no sense whatsoever. That has to be resolved. We have to resolve the forms of cocaine, crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. You get 18 times the severity of criminal sentencing for crack cocaine over powder cocaine. And the experts say it's just a different form. It really isn't very much different otherwise from that viewpoint. So those sorts of inconsistencies really affect people's lives. People can end up in prison for 10, 15, or 20 years because we can't get it right as to whether crack or powder cocaine is any different. So when you look at that, you say that's a good starting point. Let's get our drug policy right. And for goodness sakes, let's enforce the border to stop the drugs from coming in.
So lastly, as we wind up our conversation, through the years, you've been an advocate of something called earmarks, which is giving a member of Congress, House and Senate, the ability to advocate for and possibly fund very specific projects in the state or the district. In 2022, under Biden, earmarks had a comeback, and the big omnibus bill had each member had certain allocations. Now that we have Republicans who will be in charge of the House, and some Republicans are against these earmarks, what is the future, do you think, of earmarks? Because they had seemed to be a way of helping get deals done and easing and just, in a sense, divvying up federal dollars in a different way.
I support them. I always have. I believe that I have better insight into what Illinois needs and how money can be spent there wisely than someone in Washington who's not familiar with our state, to put it very directly. And I believe that there should be full disclosure of the earmarks. We ought to have limitations, so you can't give them to, certainly not an individual or a private business. They have to be given to another public entity. For example, a hospital, for example I've used in the past. Once having said that, though, I believe they are essential for the working of the Senate and the House. The reason we didn't pass a public works bill or an infrastructure bill for so long was because we eliminated earmarks. Back in the days when Democrats and Republicans could pick highway projects or things that were important for their infrastructure, everybody wanted to vote for the bill. They had bipartisan support. Take out earmarks, we couldn't pass an infrastructure bill for 5 years or more. Now we're back in business again. So it's limited to only 1% or so of the total appropriation can be earmarks, full public disclosure, and we're held accountable. And so, for example, when some of the federal money came into our state, American Rescue Plan for the pandemic, I said to the municipal league, the League of Mayors in the state of Illinois, I don't want anybody taking any of this federal money and turning it into the ultimate Frisbee park. Spend this money wisely. I don't want to be embarrassed by it. Do your job. So far, fingers crossed, things have worked out well. They're picking good things to invest in. So the same thing should be true on earmarks.
So, Senator, we're wrapping up now. And I think if we have a takeaway here, that going back to the changing the face of the federal judiciary, it's not often where you have something that is distinctly local, where the change in the Illinois-based federal seats as well as national. This will continue, you're telling us, through the next 2 years as Biden presidency enters its second half. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Lynn.
Thank you.